We know about our murderous machines. We know about the environment they're murdering.
When I was a boy, I was in New York City, and like most kids who were exposed to nature, I fell in love with it. And I actually wanted to become a scientist, a biologist. And by the time I got to university, I realized that I could spend my whole life studying what I loved and see it disappear. So I said, I'm going to study law. I moved to the UK. I was commuting into the center of London, and my lungs burned at the end of the day. I found myself staring in the mirror one morning around 3 o'clock, looking at myself saying, I'm James Thornton, I'm 33, and I'm a lawyer. You know, what can I do now? When I became an English lawyer, I learned that in the UK, one writes a very polite letter to someone before you sue them. So we wrote a very polite letter to the UK government. We said, the limits you have to meet are this. The timeline by which you have to meet it is 2010. It's now 2011. Surely you are going to do something about it. Oh no, they said. We have no intention whatever of complying with the law until at least 2025.
The government was essentially ignoring it, saying, meh, doesn't make economic sense.
We said, okay, see you in court.
I liked him because he was sort of mercurial and funny, and made it almost sort of a game.
We went to the High Court, and the High Court judge said, I'm not going to do anything about it.
Frankly, I thought it was a bit shoddy, to tell you the truth.
We then went to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals judge said, roughly, this law is rather vague. I don't think there's anything to enforce. But I had picked the air quality law to enforce partly because it was the most precise law I could find.
It's not vague. The whole point of law is not to be vague. The point of law is for everyone to agree, this is what we're talking about.
So we go to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, astoundingly, the UK government stands up and says, we're in violation of the law, can't deny it. But we have no intention whatsoever of complying with the law till at least 2025. And you, the Supreme Court, may not order us to do so. I practiced Zen for 35 years. It's very helpful. You know, the old samurai warriors practiced Zen so that they would be clear and present. It's as simple as this. So you breathe and you don't change how you breathe. And you just breathe, you count your breaths every time you breathe out. And you do that until you get to 10, and then you go back to 1. What we said, in essence, was, forget that this is an environmental case. If the government can come in and say to the Supreme Court, we're only going to comply with the law when it suits us, then you're not living in a democracy under the rule of law. You're living under fiat and diktat of a government. And the Supreme Court, when we said it that way, very nicely said, roughly, well, now that you put it that way, and they gave us an injunction. And the injunction was to the government, come into compliance, write a plan to come into compliance as soon as possible. The government did write a plan, but the plan was a very, very poor plan indeed. We went back to court, and we got the High Court to enforce the Supreme Court's injunction with a more detailed prescription of what the government had to do.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May, is to make a surprise announcement in the next 15 minutes.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election.
And they said, oh no, we mayn't do it during the election because, among other things, everyone in the electorate would become so obsessed by our clean air plan that it would distract them from voting and really considering the issues.
There was a lot of energy and commotion. I remember outside there were reporters, and my colleagues had all these boxes that we were having to carry into the court, and it was quite packed.
The judge started off with a little speech, and it was obvious that this was a fellow who knew his onions.
The judge listened to the government's claims that it needed to delay taking care of the public health, and he rejected them vigorously.
So when do we get the final plan?
Let me consult my notes. I should know all these dates by heart by now. It was the 5th of May.
You know, part of the problem has been that people think the system is unreformable. There's nothing you can do with it. It's just this kind of machine that trundles on. Well, this says you can use the mechanisms that exist now and you can change the system.
Litigation is hand-to-hand combat. You know, it's really, it's nothing but war. If you're focused on the goal and you've got the law on your side and you've got the public behind you, which we now do, then you win.